Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alicia Powell-Gillis, and I am the Senior Editor of Route 50. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Resilient Operations, State and Local Government Continuity Strategies in the New Normal, underwritten by ServiceNow. State and local governments have experienced unprecedented disruption during COVID-19. In order to weather future disruptions, pandemic or otherwise, agencies must develop resiliency strategies that empower the public workforce, incorporate emerging technologies, and create seamless operations. And that's exactly what we're tackling during today's program. Before we get started with the conversations, I'd like to point out the Q&A tab on the right of your screen. That's how you'll be able to ask questions. We'll be fielding those about halfway through the program, but feel free to submit along the way so we can get right to them when the time comes. This webcast is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Now, let's begin our program. We've got a great lineup of panelists today. So first, joining me up is Marissa Aho, Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Houston, Michael Hussey, Chief Information Officer of the State of Utah, Deborah Lucero, Supervisor of Butte County, California, and Scott Nicholson, Deputy Assistant Director of State Human Resources of the State of Washington. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm very excited for our conversation. All right, so let's just go and get right to the heart of this conversation, which is all about resilience. So what I'm going to ask each of you to do, we're going to go around the horn and just each of you kind of define what resiliency looks like in your agency and your jurisdiction, and kind of tell us a little bit about the communities you represent. So I'm going to go in order of my screen, and Deborah, you're up first.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. First of all, my name is Deborah Lucero. I am a Butte County Supervisor. Butte County is located in Northern California, about 3.5 hours north of San Francisco. And we have faced 3 major disasters in the past 3 years. All of them have made national news, of course, but the Oroville Dam spillway crisis was in 2017, where we had to evacuate 180,000 people. We had just finished with some of the road damages. The dam is nearly completely repaired at this point, the spillway, when the Camp Fire hit in 2018, which destroyed 19,000 structures, which is approximately 10% of our housing inventory, and killed 86 people. And we are still in recovery with that, as you can imagine, just trying to rebuild our housing stock. And then COVID hit. We have a county population of approximately 219,000. Although it's estimated we have lost about 10,000 residents due to lack of housing caused by the Camp Fire. We have a state university and a community college in our county, and a higher than normal number of 65 plus citizens, and generally a lack of access to medical care like many rural counties in our country. It's reported about 34% of our population is without a primary care doctor. I represent the most densely populated city of Chico, which has approximately 110,000 people. So in terms of the question, what does resiliency look like? For this workshop today, I just thought it would be good to look back and see, what does resiliency really mean? And so I just looked up the definition, because I think we need to be reminded of what it means, because we throw that word around all the time, but what does it mean? What has it come, what is it, the essence of the word? And it's able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult situations or conditions, able to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed. I love that one, because anyone who has been through what many of our counties and cities has been through realizes that that really is what happens. You get stretched and bent and compressed, and your people feel like they've been through the ringer. And after 3 years of what our county has been through, we have had to come up with everything from catastrophic leave, where our workers are able to give their leave to other folks. We have developed community teams that I can go into in more depth at a later point. But it's really taking our entire community. Government is really truly not big enough to handle what we have gone through. It's taking an entire community. And with that, I will yield my time to the next speaker.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm going to ask Mike to talk to us about resilience and what that means in Utah and what that means in his organization.
Thank you, Alicia. We're constantly thinking about resiliency, especially in this latest pandemic. I mean, that's something that's top of mind right now, and I think Deborah did a great job of kind of teeing it up and framing it, certainly with the challenges they've had. But I think of resiliency about our organization providing uninterrupted or nearly uninterrupted services for our agencies. We support all executive agencies in the state with technology, and also the citizen-facing services. And so if we can keep those uninterrupted or at least nearly uninterrupted in this type of a challenging time, I think that's really what I think of when I think of resilience. We have 22,000 state employees, about 3 million residents. And if we can continue those services for all of those folks, and figure out how to partner with other states and counties across the nation, then we first figured out how to be a little more resilient in these challenging times.
Great. Marissa, you're up next.
Great. Hello, everyone. So as a Chief Resilience Officer, a title I have had for more than 5 years in 2 fantastic cities, I define resilience a lot, and the shorthand is to survive, adapt, and thrive. But the way that I really look at resilience is solving for more than one thing, given all of the competing interests, given accelerating urgency, and given usually limited budgets. And so how can we do that? Houston and Mayor Turner released our new resilience strategy in February of 2020, and it really focuses on a few things, but it's including health and safety, equity and inclusion, climate adaptation, housing and mobility, and the economy and infrastructure. But it's designed in a way that we're looking at how to keep people more resilient, looking at our neighborhoods and how each neighborhood has specific resilience challenges, looking at our bayous and waterways and how those can be more resilient, looking at city and city operations and how to lead by example on resilience, and then looking at the region, knowing that we sit among a number of partners that we must work with in order to continue to build greater resilience.
Scott, last but certainly not least, I'm bringing you in on this question.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Scott. I'm with the state of Washington. I'm the Deputy Director at State Human Resources, and at my organization, we oversee HR policy for about 100,000 plus employees. When I look at resilience, I think it comes in different areas depending on what you're talking about. There's emotional resilience, physical resilience. I think there's value in mental resilience. When I think about government service and kind of why we're all called to government service, I try as much as possible in our work, especially during this time, to highlight the value resilience, in that I try to emphasize a sense of purpose and mission to the work of what we're doing and why we're doing it for constituents. I hear that from Mike in Utah talking about trying to provide uninterrupted service. Why do we do that and highlighting it in our conversation? Because research shows that connecting employees to a purpose higher than themselves is a main driver of employee engagement. So if employees are connected to a purpose, they're more likely to be able to navigate the storm, whether we're talking about COVID, budget shortfalls, or weekend executive orders that may change your entire work week. It's all about really trying to connect to the reason you're here and the reason we're here to serve and the mission that we're trying to accomplish.
So Scott, I want to kind of pick up on the point that both you raised and Mike raised, and just what you just said about why you do that, why you do the uninterrupted service or nearly uninterrupted. Can you talk to us exactly what you say to your employees and what that message actually sounds like?
Yeah, and it is tailored. We have 128 different agencies, all with different missions. But if you look at our Department of Social and Health Services, their mission is to transform lives. People are in a whole spectrum of different places in their lives, including needing benefits, needing unemployment insurance, and so the purpose is a service model, and if you're connected to why it's so important to ensure that somebody's getting their SNAP benefit or getting their benefits so that they can feed their children, their ability to get on the job training so that they can have the dignity of what it feels like to have a job, being focused on what is the impact you're having on communities and how important and essential it is, because it can be, it can happen sometimes where government workers are disparaged or being thought of as being lazy. And so how do you change that narrative so you can spur and fire engagement within individual employees? And it really is that higher service. And really government service is one of the few areas, including nonprofits, where you can really hold that higher sense of purpose of what you're providing to the communities.
So, Mike, since you kind of raised this as well, I want to ask you, as you alluded to in the service model, as Scott just said, about uninterrupted or nearly uninterrupted. Can you talk to us about how you do that? What kind of pressure does that put on you? And how do you make sure that your services are able to actually do exactly what it is that you want it to do?
That's interesting. Well, first, let me just comment on what Scott said. I think sometimes our employees feel like they're so focused and narrowly focused on a project, they don't lift their gaze and see that bigger picture. And so I think as you engage your employees and they have that broader picture of what's going on, then all of a sudden they become engaged and know, hey, I know what needs to occur for and so when we're thrown into a pandemic or an earthquake or what, Deborah, I outlined some of the challenges she has, you kind of know what response needs to occur when people are lifting their gaze. Hey, we just want to maintain SNAP benefits. So how do we do that? It's not so much focused on the coding that I'm doing. They're looking at a larger picture. And so I think when you start to talk about resilience in that bigger picture, like you're describing, Alicia, I think everybody has that larger gaze, and you're not the stereotypical. Scott raised another funny issue for me. I think sometimes the stereotypical employee is like featured in Hollywood Zootopia, when they run into the DMV and they run into that sloth at the counter, and it takes forever to get through the questioning that they had in Zootopia. Sometimes that's the perception, and I think if people realize, oh, this is what it means, I'm saving lives or I'm changing lives, then I think then the engagement with the employee takes on that broader picture, and you start to see the resilience that occurs just naturally.
So I'm going to bring Deborah and Marissa on this conversation too about the workforce and just how you all kind of get the employees within your county, within your city, to understand what their role is as it pertains to resilience and what messages or strategies you use. So I'll go Deborah and then Marissa on that.
Well, in our particular situation, we are very challenged in that regard, simply because our workforce is so exhausted. We are experiencing, and another thing is we have 2/3 of our workforce is actually of retirement age. So you combine that with the fact that we've had these 3 disasters in a row, and you could say, yes, we have somewhat of a morale problem. But on the other hand, we have these employees who every single day go above and beyond to try to help keep everything flowing. It's been difficult. I'm not going to say that we have a magic silver bullet, that fixes everything. We don't. But what I'm continually amazed at is the innovation of our staff. When they see that there is some kind of workflow that is not working. SNAP is a good example. A lot of it is dictated by things that we have no control over, but we have control over small things. And so it's those small things that we tend to grab onto and say, well, we can't affect this, but we can affect this. And we started a leadership academy within our organization. And what that has done is the folks who go through that academy can take on an area that they believe needs to be improved, and they come up with the improvement. And so what was mentioned earlier about connecting people to a higher cause, connecting your workforce to a higher cause, I believe actually works very well if you empower them to help create the system that they are going to be implementing. And that I find works very well with people, to create morale, to create a sense of belonging, and making a difference.
So Marissa, how are you empowering the workforce in Houston to bring about the vision of the resilient strategy that you all created earlier this year?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first critical step was that we included so many partners internal to the city, but also external partners in the development of the strategy, which took about 18 months. And, you know, when it was released in February and then COVID came shortly thereafter, we had a list of 62 things with, 62 actions with, I haven't fully counted them all, sub actions, but in the hundreds, to address all of the things that we knew were a challenge pre-COVID. And then in May of this year, we released a COVID addendum to the strategy that showed directly how to apply 42 of the 62 things we'd already identified as opportunities to build greater resilience, and how they were related to COVID response or recovery or adaptation. And one of the ways that we've been able to pull in city employees, but I really truly believe that resilience building is up to every single person. Being a chief resilience officer, I feel like a matchmaker in terms of what the challenges are and what what the opportunities are to address them. But one of the things that I've tried to do is really let folks know that everything that they are doing can play a role in resilience building. And maybe we don't call it that, but we need to figure out how to make sure that they are welcome in the conversation and that the things that they are doing fully apply. It helps when you have a pretty broad resilience strategy to make those connections. But with the departmental resilience officers or department resilience officers, we have an established hat. It's not a full-time position, but at least a liaison in every single department that are working with me to implement the strategy and are working with each other to sort of break down some of those barriers to cross-departmental work. And resilience is so interdisciplinary. It's really important to have that space in order to work together to address these challenges.
So the next question I want to ask, which interesting, Liv, is the same question we got from our audience. What you all are talking about in terms of empowering your workforces to do these resilient services, to perform these resilient functions. Obviously, many of your workforces, though, have now gone to a remote setting. So how do you continue to deliver essential services, and how do you keep them able to perform and the level they need to perform while everyone is virtual? So Marissa, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Sure, and greetings from my office in City Hall. There are so many things. I will focus on one because it's near and dear to my heart. And that is that towards the end of April, Mayor Turner started the Health Equity Response Task Force. So 5 of the directors in his office, the acronym is HER. We all happen to be female. It's sort of funny. But the Health Equity Response Task Force has been working on really addressing our most vulnerable neighborhoods and continuing to provide services to vulnerable populations and being able to coordinate that with a lot of various departments. And it's just been a different and really impressive lens in which to address COVID and to sort of partner across different expertise in order to be holistic in our approach.
Mike, I'm going to ask you the same question. How are you doing this with a virtual workforce to a degree?
Yeah, that is a challenge. I mean, it's interesting because you're thrust into this, and overnight you're trying to have 22,000 employees work remotely and have resilience in all of the services that you offer. So it's an evolving thing. You're constantly learning, and so we're constantly getting feedback from our partner agencies. What do we need to pivot on? What do we need to change? You look at those things, right up front what you need to do. But without a CRO like they're lucky to have with Marissa, we just kind of learn a little bit as we go and make those tweaks and pivots as we go. But at the same time, I think the other point was mentioned that sometimes you're worried about morale and you're trying to stay connected in a disconnected office. And it's really a challenge for us, for those employees to stay engaged. And so, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but some of the things we're doing is we used to have a get together in the summer. Well, now we don't. And so we're trying to figure out things that we might do to engage our employees, which luckily was Photoshop the boss. So they came out and Photoshopped me into different scenarios, and we had a nice competition to just keep the employee or the workforce engaged. And then at the same time, we have these town hall discussions that we can talk about the winners of our competition and the competition for next week, and then also stay connected and talk about what's going on. And so we have I have about 720 employees. We have all 720 employees coming together virtually. We're able to talk about what's next, what's on the horizon, what does the future look like. So it's kind of a fun discussion leading into, hey, these are still some of the challenges we need to overcome. So I think staying engaged with a disconnected workforce is really helping us to kind of tackle those challenges.
Scott, I want to bring you in on this conversation to talk about what Mike was just talking about staying engaged, but also can you not only talking about it from the performance perspective, but the emotional perspective and the morale perspective, as you also raised earlier in this conversation.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the emotions of an employee when they're disconnected in a virtual environment, I think it connects right to resilience, right? Because we learn a lot from each other, and we learn a lot each other about how we behave. And so if you're isolated, if you're in a remote area, sometimes you can unlearn behaviors, which can be a good thing, and sometimes you can unlearn some behaviors that you wish they would have not unlearned. And I think when we talk about resilience, it's that ability to regulate yourself and maintain calm and be aware of your situation, which can be very difficult to do in a virtual environment. So the more that you can do what Mike's talking about those engagements, even if it's on things not necessarily 100% work related, it is work related in the sense that you are building a team camaraderie to be resilient, to have that emotional resilience, so that when they have to react to X, Y, and Z just happen, they're engaging their colleagues in a platform virtually, whether it's Zoom or it's on the phone, in a much more calm and more responding manner than a reacting manner. And so some of the things you can do are just what I love, the Photoshop the boss. I might have to take that. Some things that we've been doing are hosting the trivia night, right, and different trivia topics depending on what's going on. That's a great one to do. A rock paper scissors tournament, which is great, where you have all your employees engage in a rock paper scissors tournament virtually, and you do like a ranking, and it goes through, and then you put up a prize at the end. It can be really fun because they're engaging on something else, and they're connecting with people, and I think that increases emotional resilience and also that relational resilience, where they're realizing that they're not alone, they're not isolated. They might be in a room alone, but they actually have somebody out who's also in a room alone, who they can work together to respond to situations.
And Deborah, any thoughts from your perspective or any innovative engagement tactics that you'd like to share?
Well, I was thinking actually about how difficult it has been in rural areas. I know there might be a lot of rural folks listening, and one of our challenges is where we live. We still have areas that are without broadband, so we literally have employees who are unable to basically get online at home. So how do you deal with that? They may not have the connections. They don't have, the back end to get into the government secure network. So we are still tackling some of those issues. And interestingly, there are some people who love working at home. They have adapted to it. They're great. They don't care if their dogs are barking in their background or the kids are coming up and, tapping them on the shoulder. But there are others who really don't like working at home. They liked the escape to work because, they didn't have that privacy. So we are really trying to work with each individual. If we find someone who is saying, you know what, this is not working for me to be working from home, can I please come into the office? We make accommodations. We try to find a good situation for them. And with buildings scattered throughout the county, a lot of them are virtually empty. We've been able to do that. So we try to find what's going to fit the employee, because that happiness factor just can't be overlooked. You've got to keep people engaged and wanting to help other people, because that's our entire job, is to make sure that our operations are uninterrupted. So an employee isn't happy at home, we try to find them another place to work from that they're comfortable in. That's another thing. You know, they need to feel safe, and they need to feel that that their health is being watched over as well.
So Deborah, you raised obviously how resilience might look different in every community, whether it's your state workforce, but even from an individual level perspective. Some people live in rural communities, urban, suburban, what have you. So and also all these communities face different experiences, have had different shocks, have different stresses that challenge resources. So I'm curious, how do you kind of create a resilience approach at the county level so that you can, but that it can be, that it's something that it works for everybody, but also that can be broad enough that it works for everyone, but also can get in deeper to like the individual communities or people or what have you?
Well, first of all, I love what Houston is doing, and the fact that they are investing in a resilience officer and an office, and the fact that they have liaisons in each department or agency. I think that's critical. I would like to see us, we have an Office of Emergency Services, which is more traditional in its approach. And I think an Office of Emergency Services really differs from a resiliency concept. When you're trying to embed resiliency within different departments, that looks different in every department. Personally, I am an out of the box thinker, and I think government needs to be more out of the box in its thinking. I think we should be looking at examples. For instance, where we live, no one's going to come up on a white horse and try to rescue poor little Butte County from all of its woes. So we need to be the best medicine for ourselves. And I think part of that medicine is looking at new concepts that are really kind of old. For instance, in North Dakota, they have a public bank. Public banking is something that we, I think, should be looking at for our agencies and for government. And one of those reasons is that when this is all over, what's going to happen to our small business community? Because we're not just looking out for ourselves, we're looking out for our communities. We're looking out for the small business person. I just recently looked at our PPP loans that our businesses from around here received. And it was very few that were received from Wall Street banks. So that might sound a little radical. Oh my, getting into banking. But it just became legalized here in California, and it's that we are able to establish 10 public banks. And I think we should start looking at regionally helping one another. County entities struggle. A lot of rural county entities struggle. And I think creating a regionalized approach to things can assist with some of our larger issues. And a misconception, I'm just putting this out there for a public banking concept, is that you're going to be in competition with other banks, but it's really more of a wholesale concept where we're helping our own government agencies, whether it's the school districts that we serve or the small towns and jurisdictions that are within our own jurisdiction that we serve. But we need to be our own best medicine, because we all know that climate change is here and it's affecting each of us, whether it's more hurricanes, tornadoes, sea level rising. In our instance, it's wildfires. And, we get PG&E shutoffs, so we're having to be resilient in even how we get our energy. What does that mean? Do we create microgrids for our counties so that when we get shut down, we are still able to operate our jails, or we're still able to operate, all of our services? So there's so many things to be thinking about, and I just think it takes a new approach.
So Mike, I want to bring you in because as Deborah was alluding to, is just resiliency often can sometimes feel like it's an emergency management thing and it gets siloed in there. But obviously you're a CIO, you handle IT infrastructure. So what does resilience even mean from that perspective? What does that mean in terms of how you procure services, how you design IT service models around that, IT service delivery around that?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, when I think of resiliencies, many of the things that Deborah was talking about with their emergency operations center, we have a seat at that table, and so that we're always stress testing our resiliency and do the IT service work. A lot of times, what we find out is that there's been a change and we weren't aware of that change until we get in and we're stress testing the system and they, oh, well, we thought things were going to be this way. So we're constantly pivoting and like I was saying earlier, getting that regular cadence with the partner agencies to find out what changes are needed to help them in a service provider role to help the agencies continuing offering those services. And so we're constantly sitting down, getting that cadence, like I was talking about with the agencies. We have IT directors embedded in each of the agencies that will kind of give this their perspective melded with the enterprise perspective. And so that really does help us in that continuity. And so it sometimes we do feel like that the Emergency Operations Center here in the state is really leading that effort, but we are certainly helping drive some of those initiatives because of the IT functions. Just about everything now has an IT component to them. When you were talking about the power grid or you're talking about emergency operations, all of those things now have this IT component. Now, when we get into a pandemic or something like that, you get under emergency more agile. But I don't know that, we have all of the IT procurement falls underneath the CIO in the state of Utah. So it is centralized, so we can kind of see what everything is going on and see the agency and make sure that those efforts are coordinated. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are going in the right direction of the agencies. And so that's where that regular cadence and coming together really makes all the difference in the world when you get thrown into some of these things.
So Scott, similar to you, how are you engaging with your sister agencies to ensure that you're also what your agency is focused on is also fulfilling the larger Washington state mission of trying to be resilient?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to something that Deborah talked about a little bit with the regional voice or the community voice, really centering that and making that the focal point of what you're trying to do. The state of Washington isn't the largest state out there, but we're fairly, there's fairly diverse geography, both in terms of as well as population. And so really centering that community voice is really important as you develop tools and resources to build in that resilience. So for instance, we've started a Safe Start guide here at the state of Washington to allow agencies that are geographically diverse, that are also diverse in their service orientation, they're diverse in the populations that they serve, tailored tools in order to determine when it's right for them to resume operations and at what extent to resume operations. Because as we were talking about before, it's not just you're on the east side, I'm on the west side. It can get down to what building am I located in? What are the metrics? How much IT infrastructure do I have there to support employees on VPN versus somewhere else? Do I have the correct licenses to support this group to be on Zoom? It really needs to be tailored and focused, and it can be overwhelming to think about it when you look at it from a macro level. But the more that you enhance the individual community voice or the different regional voices, the more that they'll let you know what they need. And actually, if you can create that transparent, authentic relationship, it actually in itself builds relational resilience because they know that they have a partner to ask those questions, so that sister agencies feel as though that they can have their needs met because we're not doing a one-size-fits-all approach.
So Marissa, I know you're through your plan, you all obviously have taken the not doing the one-size-fits-all approach to heart, but also embedding community voices. So can you talk a little bit about how you're working on that in Houston and how your plan is also macro, but also can be something that can go to a micro level?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that we are working on, especially around COVID-19, is really looking at sort of the shocks and stresses that already existed and how they're getting exacerbated by COVID-19. And one of those that doesn't come up as much is actually around urban heat. And so Friday, actually, we carried on with a 320 square mile community volunteer led urban heat island mapping campaign that was all socially distanced. It was all, we wore masks. We had about 80 volunteers, and they went throughout the city and the county and looked at our urban heat islands, and did 3 runs, one from 6 to 7 in the morning, one from 3 to 4 in the morning, or in the afternoon, and one from 7 to 8 at night, as part of the heat watch work that's going on in a lot of cities. And we were really excited about having participation from so many community members that are interested in one of the major resilience issues in Houston participate. They all had different reasons for doing so, from a public health perspective to a transportation planner perspective. We got a few city employees to join as well. And so we're just trying to find opportunities like that one, even when it's challenging to engage folks and to have these conversations and to look at the things that COVID-19 is exacerbating, to align our urban heat with COVID, to align the way that we prepare for and respond to hurricanes with COVID, and continue to have that lens of addressing multiple challenges at the same time, with engaging the community.
Great. I want to remind our audience that we will be doing Q&A soon. So if you have questions, I see a 1 or 2, please make sure to put those in the chat and we'll get to them in just a moment. But sticking on this community aspect, obviously a lot of the conversation we've talked about is how government can be resilient, how government agencies, government workers, et cetera, are resilient. But as we talk about community, that's obviously not just about what you all are offering, but that's also about personal resilience. So how do you, and not only personal resilience, but also thinking about the businesses in your communities and how they're resilient, since I think it was Deborah who alluded to earlier that government can't do this all alone. So I'm just curious to kind of hear from you, Marissa, just on that point, is what is the responsibility or the expectation about personal resilience, and are there ways that how do you encourage that, incentivize it, et cetera?
Yeah, so I think the focus that we've had on individual resilience, whether that be family or an individual, or whether that be a property or a small business, is trying to have the resilience conversation at that level as much as we can, to complement sort of the citywide conversations that we are having. And so the resilience strategy has a number of targets that are identified. We're working on a whole additional set of KPIs. I see a question about benchmarking. The data and metrics are so very important. One of those targets that we've established is around having 500,000 additional preparedness training opportunities in the next 5 years. It's a big number, but there are a number of people in Houston. So we're trying to figure out what more we can do. Clearly, with COVID-19, educating community members about preparedness and being responsible during COVID-19 is a huge part of what the Mayor's Health Equity Task Force is working with a number of partners to do. And so trying to make sure that we're communicating as best we can with so many individual Houstonians. This week, we launched a sort of mini version of the resilience strategy in, I think, 6 additional languages, in order to continue to meet people where they're at and make sure that the messages that we are trying to get out about resilience reach as many people as they possibly can.
Deborah, I'm curious to kind of get your take on this as well, given, as you alluded to at the top of our conversation, all of the past events that you all have experienced in your county, is obviously, and in addition to what we're seeing today. So where are you seeing personal resilience? How are you and your county officials working to help broaden that and encourage that kind of attitude?
Well, again, being in a rural part of Northern California, communication can be something as simple as where do people gather now that their entire community is burned down? Is it at the post office? Is it at, what used to be something else? And so we have actually gone to putting up message boards. We'll have people literally camping on their land in either trailers or tents, which we really didn't encourage, but these people have no place else to go. So it's been very challenging in a time like this to get the word out to everyone. And in California, we also have the challenge of being so multilingual, much like Houston. So we have, many different needs. We have a young population here, also Hispanic. And so my goal as a Hispanic has been to make sure that our language is also the language of resiliency out to our community. Because while we only have 17% Hispanics here in our county, COVID, more than 40% of the cases of COVID in our county are Hispanics. So there is an unequal effect, on this community. So it's challenging to get the messages out. You have to understand the communities. You have to have trusted communicators, elders in the community, people that are trusted within those communities to deliver the message. Because that's another thing, is just building trust so that people are going to trust that the message that you're delivering is really truly going to keep them safe. Not everybody believes that, and especially if it's coming from government. So it can be a challenge. It can be a definite challenge. So I think it's just working on the equity that I think government needs to get a lot better on. It's understanding how to speak the language that to the group, not just the language, but the message. How do you relay that message to someone? What format does it take? Are we advertising on the local TV station, but everybody's listening to, a Hispanic radio station? So how do you do all of that? So it's a lot to ask of government, I think, to take all of that in. And that's why it's so important that we're hiring people that look different, so that they can deliver those messages to the populations that they serve, particularly in areas where you see high numbers of people that don't look like a lot of us on this phone call. So I think that we need to get better at that, and the message can be as simple as like what we do. We literally put up flyers on billboards out in our rural communities telling people when there's going to be a food bank, when there's going to be a free clinic, when there's going to be testing, where you can receive a COVID test for free, all of that kind of information. So while we have high tech, we also have very low tech.
Yeah. So Scott and Mike, I want to ask you both. Obviously, we've talked about how you work within your workforces about professional resilience, but how do you also broaden that out so it's not just about being resilient in their day-to-day jobs, but also resilient when they go home with their families, with their friends, with their communities? How have you done that? So I'll start with Scott and then go to Mike.
Yeah, I think part of that is the idea of the physical resilience, the idea that you can be, manage your time well and have that work-life balance. I think it's very tempting. I was reading an article that made me a little concerned that now the commute hours that employees were spending are now fair games for meetings, right? Because you no longer, and so it can be really easy to then fill up your day with meetings without that time to relax and disconnect. And that work-life balance is essential. And when we think about schools opening and the idea of childcare and who has access to it and parenting, we're going to have to think about other ways to create resilience create resilience within our workforce to accommodate that. And so we'll need to think about things like split schedules, the idea that you're going to have a baby on Zoom call, that you're going to, you might have a dog in the background. And those are the things that you need to allow employees to develop their authentic self. And that, I will say, work cannot happen in a vacuum, because people need to feel that as though they can talk about things that are happening, which means that now that the technology we're having, like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using, is bringing people into people's homes, you're going to need to be able to really talk about things that maybe historically in the workforce you haven't. So when we think about DEI efforts, when we think about the social events that are happening, the murder of George Floyd, you need to be able and willing to have those conversations in order to create that resiliency, so that people can feel as though they can not only disconnect but also feel connected when they're at work. Because no more is it, I'm just going to go to work and compartmentalize and then I'm just going to go home. Those days are over for now, at least, if not for the foreseeable future.
Mike?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting. I was messaging our public information officer this morning, and her babysitter came in contact with somebody that had tested positive. So she no longer had her babysitter for her twins. And she said by 8 a.m., she thinks she heard mommy 2,000 times. And so she's trying to figure out how to balance the expectations that she has at work now that she doesn't have a place for the kids. And I said, hey, we're very flexible here, and we'll just figure out how to roll with it. You roll with these challenges. And that's what we've been stressing throughout our entire organization, is that we need to be flexible with our employees. I think there's still some unknowns out there. We don't know when we're going to get hit with an exposure. When many of our employees have been asked now to move over to contact tracing, how do they now change their roles? So we're very flexible as an organization. We know the core business functions we need to still accomplish, but there may be some other options for us to be flexible and plug holes that need to be plugged and help our folks move around. But most importantly, I tell our employees, I read a book called Peak Performance. It says rest just as much as you work. And so as Scott was talking about that work-life balance, some of the best performing athletes in the world have just as much rest at the right times so that they can perform at the highest levels. And so we also stress that they also rest and take the time away from work that should be. So it seems to be working.
Thank you all. So I'm going to go to our audience Q&A. The question, and Marissa alluded to this earlier, and I think both Marissa and Scott had talked about benchmarks. So we're going to go to, that's the question I'll throw your guys' way. So kudos to everyone for recognizing the interconnectedness of community functions. How have you undertaken any benchmarking processes to help identify where you are and what opportunities there may be to improvement? So Scott, let me get your quick answer on that, and then I'll go to Marissa.
Yeah, so one of the things that is something that probably we did as a government agency not very well, or as an entity, is that we used to create metrics that weren't meaningful, right? Because we wanted to find the quantitative, it had to have a number. And if I can just put a number to it, then I can measure it, right? Didn't really take the time to find out what's a meaningful metric or benchmark that the community needed. So when we talk about education, what does it mean? We were so heavily emphasized on the percentage of students with free and reduced lunch, because it was an easy metric that we could use in order to divvy out resources. But really, was that what they needed? Was that what the school district needed when thinking about that? So coming up with other processes and other metrics to use. And some of that requires the work with the community. How do they measure success? What does success look like? And really, that is more than just a number. That can require extensive community engagement. So when I think about some of the processes that we were trying to do, it really is about centering those voices into the conversation and letting them be the metric or the benchmark process we use.
Marissa?
Yeah, so the resilience strategy process in Houston and in LA starts with an assessment to really look at what is already occurring, what the gaps are, what the opportunities are, and so on. We released the resilience strategy with 18 targets because of sort of KPI fatigue. Trying to lift up the things that we cared about the most, and having one target for each goal. But in the meantime, we've been developing over the last 6 months a lot more of those measurements or key performance indicators that are meaningful and that will help us tell our story better. And with the idea of having more open data, having more dashboarding, that those are all things that are in the resilient strategy as things we want to do, as well as this equity or equality indicators program that a lot of cities have put forward. So that's something that we're working on now, of having that benchmarking related specifically to racial equity, in order to be able to assess, hopefully, progress. One of the other things that we're doing to get ready for more dashboarding is around our health equity response task force for COVID. We have a dashboard, which is a PowerPoint slide that I update weekly, and then we put onto our Houston COVID-19 recovery website. But in the meantime, it's working, and that's a way of being able to measure and show the various things that we've stood up very quickly around our health equity response to COVID, whether that be the number of masks we've distributed, or the number of food deliveries, or the number of mask up billboards that we have in particular neighborhoods. And that dashboard gets updated weekly so that we know what we're doing, and the community has direct access to see how we're improving or where we're stalled. And that's really, really important in terms of measuring our success.
Well, with that, we've reached the end of our time this morning for this panel, but our program isn't quite over yet. So let me thank Marissa, Michael, Deborah, and Scott. We're so grateful for your time and the insights you were able to share. Next up, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Sam Jackson.
Hey, thanks, Alicia, and thanks to the panel. My name is Sam Jackson. I'm Senior Producer of Events at Government Executive Media Group. And at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Chris Dilley, Chief Technology Officer for State and Local Government at ServiceNow, for a session presented by our underwriter, ServiceNow. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Chris Dilley. I'm the CTO and Chief Architect for State and Local Government and Higher Education with ServiceNow. Today, we're going to be talking about response to readiness to resiliency and the roadmap to the next normal for government. First of all, I'd like to thank Route 50 and GovExec for allowing us to be a partner and sponsor in this event today. For those of you not familiar with ServiceNow, we believe behind every great experience is a great workflow. And ServiceNow is that workflow platform that can deliver that great experience. So we believe in ourselves as a platform of platforms. So not only can you support your IT business, your employee workflows, your customer, your citizen workflows in government, you can also use the platform to manage work across other sources, because we recognize that not everything is going to be within the confines of one application. So those of you not familiar with ServiceNow, we just want you to understand some of our capabilities as we look to really how we can help states, organizations respond and become resilient in today's world and in the next normal. So as we think of our GovNow platform, our capability map is really across IT, is across enterprise business, is across citizen services and employee services. So we really can respond and support to all aspects of the government challenges that we have to support our citizens today in a more efficient manner, in a more digital manner, and support that digital modernization effort, and really help drive that visibility that all citizens want and that all governments want to really provide optimum service and make sure that we can do it in a cost-effective manner. So as we think about government service delivery, citizen engagement is so important. As citizens are moving more and more services, especially in the pandemic phase we're in today, around how do we drive that digital experience? How do we drive that engagement through our mobile phones, through our laptops, through our desktops, through our tablets, to really provide that experience? How do we make sure that we can schedule, we can engage, with the government resources that we need to get the services that we need in these tough times for a lot of folks? But also, how can we make sure that we can maintain and manage our operations, our business that we need to run as a government, to make sure that we can scale, to make sure that we can deliver those services, and we have visibility from an IT, from an infrastructure, from a cloud services perspective, to have all the insights that we need to make decisions, to make data-driven decisions, to make informed app rationalization decisions, to make sure we're optimizing what we own and how we continue to best serve our internal customers as well as our external citizens. So the way we look at it as a roadmap to the next normal, we really see it in 3 phases. Very much about response. A lot of states, a lot of organizations have been looking at how do we respond in hours and days. How do we make sure that we can get information up? We can provide services, and we can't take weeks or months to deliver these in large projects. So we need to make sure the agility of what we need to deliver in a rapid fashion. And then as more and more states, organizations are coming back into the office, how do we make sure that we can do that safely and securely? How do we make sure that we can help manage the new demand that's going to be coming in with the new business challenges that we're all faced with today? And then last, how do we make sure that what we do today is going to be part of the long-term resiliency and make sure that we're not building a house of cards. We're building a solid foundation. We're building solid services. We provide that digital scalability to support not only our internal organization, our employees, but also our citizen and customer needs. So as we look at that transformation, it all starts with the employees. We want to make sure that we can deliver the employees the right experience anywhere. As employees now are working remotely, work from home, working from different locations, managing their lives differently. We recognize that that's just as important in enterprise business as it is in government to be able to deliver that and make sure that the employees are getting communicated and stay connected. We also want to make sure that we can engage with those citizens. These are tough times for a lot of our constituents. We want to make sure that we can deliver that. We can provide that digital applications, those digital services that they need without having to wait on hold, connect with call centers, send emails. We want to drive that different type of experience. And the people, behind the front lines, how do we make sure from an operations and IT perspective that all the applications, all the systems are supporting, that are supporting so many of these folks are up? How do we make sure that we continue to be nimble and manage our spend, manage our software, our hardware, and what our organization, really the oxygen, the air that our organization needs to operate? And then how do we build those new apps that we need to respond in this world? And that's where really ServiceNow can provide so many solutions for all across the enterprise, whether it's internal, which is some that we released for our COVID response. With the state of Washington, we co-built an emergency response application that the state of Washington shared with every state as a free application to be able to deliver that. How do we look at some of these other applications and understand how we do contact tracing? How do we bring people back and make sure that they're ready as they come back into the office and make sure that they're doing the appropriate screening and management? We believe this is all driven. These are all workflows. These are all experiences that we want internally as employees or as citizens that we expect as part of our experience and the governments that we're part of. And we believe these digital workflows are so important for what we're doing, on our mobile phones. Again, it's not about being in the office anymore. It's about how we operate and how we manage. Some great examples that we have that all of you can go out to. Howard County, Maryland. They're delivering a full digital services catalog out to their citizens to really find the categories that they need, the information that they need, the business license, the 311 services, whatever they need to deliver from a government perspective that they can provide, back to their citizens. The Delaware Department of Labor, with the unprecedented volumes that every unemployment, every workforce office has been faced, Delaware provided a great interface to be able to have, virtual agent conversations, chatbots, to be able to deflect a lot of those inquiries that were repetitive, that were really taking up a lot of time as people were trying to manage more more complex cases. So they were able to deflect 150,000 or 475,000 interactions through the virtual agent, and we're able to create 150,000 cases as a result of that. So the net of that could be greater than 300,000 cases that were possibly deflected, that someone didn't have to answer, that they were able to answer directly through themselves. And they were able to resolve over 48,000 of those through automation, through self-service, and driving a different type of experience. This is only going to be a solid foundation that Delaware continues to build on going forward. And as the state of Tennessee continues to change the experience of their citizens, led by their CIO and really driven to have a different type of experience. In 2019, the CIO made the proclamation that citizens should have the same type of experience as consumers have when dealing with government. And the state of Tennessee has been driving that type of experience on the platform and really making sure that all this leads to being a resilient organization. And as I mentioned before, the Washington State Department of Health, as the COVID and the pandemic response hit Washington as one of the first states, they needed to make sure that they were going to be able to manage their resources that they needed to respond to this. So working with ServiceNow, they were able to build an application on the platform that really helped them respond, have them visibility, and really manage the chaos that they were really experiencing as a state. As we were all dealing with this, they were able to respond much faster. Same with the city of Los Angeles. Within 48 hours, in working with the city of Los Angeles, we were able to launch a COVID-19 testing site and application for them to utilize. And in the first week, over 100,000 people interacted with the application to really provide this and make sure that it was a scalable solution that was going to deliver for all the people that were really wondering how to respond to this, how to react, and where to go for testing. So the mayor launched this initiative on a Friday evening and announced it live on Sunday evening. So less than in 48 hours, we were able to build this and launch this. This is the power of a platform. This is what you do to build a resilient organization and continue to drive a different type of experience for government. I want to thank Route 50 and GovExec again for allowing us to sponsor and support this event. My name is Chris Dilley. Do not hesitate to reach out to me. We're excited to be part of this journey in government.